Dr. Jims. I greet you in the live broadcast in the frameworks of online marathon, which is called Enigma of Russian School of Fencing. May I please kindly ask you to introduce yourself to our viewers in regard to your academic pursuit of Russian Mafia?
Okay. Well, I was a professor for 40 years, and I taught at 3 different colleges and universities in the United States, mostly at Rutgers University in the state of New Jersey. And my specialty was criminal justice, and for about the last 20 or 25 years of that, my specialty was organized crime. And in particular, I had an opportunity to become a member of an exchange delegation to the then Soviet Union. So I got an opportunity to travel to Mafia, other places, Soviet Union, and to develop relationships with a number of colleagues. And that's what sort of spurred, gave me the opportunity to engage in this research about crime.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Jim, what do you think, what is unique and specific about Russian Mafia? And what makes it different from all other criminal structures around the world?
Well, first of all, let me take up the 2 terms of Russian Mafia. I'll deal with the Russian part first. That's somewhat of a misnomer, because many of the individuals, from my experience, who engage in these kinds of criminal activities are not, in fact, Russians. They may be Ukrainians. They may, in some cases, they're Europeans, like Albanians or Bulgarians. But Russian has become a catch-all label for all of these particular groups. For example, one of the groups in Russia that's very active, Chechens. The Chechens regard themselves as being Russians. But they were obviously of the former Soviet Union and now part of the Federation of Russia. The second term, Mafia. Mafia, the notion Mafia comes from Sicily in southern Italy, refers to those forms of organized crime. It's a particular kind of organized crime which is involved with providing mostly protection rackets. They create monopolies over a variety of enterprises, and then they provide sort of a safety valve, if you will, over those enterprises. And that's something bigger and more extensive than straightforward organized crime. A lot of the so-called Russians, and I use the term so-called because I'll just use that as a label, who are engaged in criminal activity are not really mafia. They don't have monopolies over these criminal enterprises. They don't have the connections with the government entities and so on. For example, Sicilian Mafia had, Cosa Nostra had, in some places here in the United States. So they're not literally a mafia.
So, Dr. Jim, how do you think, what role does this so-called Russian Mafia play in the United States? How large is it in there?
Again, keeping in mind that Russian and Mafia are just labels that are referring to something that's broader. Initially, back in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and a lot more movement of people from the former Soviet Union to the West, there was a great deal of concern in the United States, particularly in certain areas in the U.S. One of the areas that I researched was an area called Brighton Beach, which is in Brooklyn, in New York. But the predominant community there is not Russian; it's Ukrainian. But these Ukrainians, and they were criminals who came, but they were not a large organized criminal group. They were engaged mostly in local extortion rackets. They would victimize local businesses in Brighton Beach, but they didn't have the kind of sort of widespread national connections that you think a mafia has, nor were they in a position to compete with, for example, Italians, who had the dominant monopoly control for organized crime activities in New York City.
May I please ask you, have you ever met the representatives of the so-called Russian Mafia?
Not knowingly. I have talked to a number of people who could have been, they were very knowledgeable, and they could have been knowledgeable because they had some connection, but they did not identify themselves as such.
I see. If that's possible, if that's not confidential, can you share some stories or cases of those meetings?
I recall on one occasion talking to a person who I thought was a police officer, who he said he was willing to talk to me about the crime situation and so on, but not in his office. So we went to an apartment that ostensibly belonged to his grandmother, and he spoke, quite openly about criminal activity and so on that were going on as he saw them in Moscow. He didn't say specifically that he himself was involved in any of this, but he had a lot of knowledge for somebody who was an outsider. I also had another occasion in which I was staying in an apartment in Moscow, and there was a young man who was living in this apartment, and he came home one day, and he had a beautiful fur coat, beautiful leather coat, fur-lined, obviously extremely expensive coat, and he wanted to know if I was interested in buying this coat. So I asked him about, where did this come from? How did he get it? And in the course of these questions and answers, it became very clear to me that he was engaged in some kind of black market enterprise, which is a great deal of what the criminal activity that I saw was. It was black market linked to bringing in, not necessarily drugs, but things that were illegal in accordance with the Soviet system, and therefore were great money-making opportunities for people engaging in the black market activities.
What would be the historical periods that we can divide the Russian mafia's formation?
Yes. There's another peculiarity about crime in general, like going back to the times, well, even before the Soviet Union. If you go back to history in Russia, the valuable properties, the valuable to the country, belonged to the Tsar and belonged to the nobility. The peasants, who were by far the largest numbers of people, owned little or nothing. If there were serfs, they owned nothing. But they developed a psychology, a kind of a mind, which said that, for example, the timber that grew on property that belonged to the Tsar, they developed the attitude these didn't belong to anybody, and therefore they could be stolen. This developed a certain mindset about property. If property is not owned by individuals, it's sort of this public amorphous sense, then stealing it is not all that wrong. So they developed this kind of psychology about approaching and things of that kind that were peculiar, I think, to that kind of, it may have existed in other countries, but it was certainly peculiar to that system. Then when the Soviet Union came about, you had a whole development of the Gulag system. And the Gulag system incarcerated not only criminals, but political criminals, thousands and millions of them, ultimately. And out of that Gulag system developed a criminal tradition called the Vori, the thieves in law. These were the people who were the most sophisticated criminals in the Gulag. They sort of rose top of the heap because they were shrewder, they were tougher, they were more aggressive, smarter, all of those things. So they rise to the top of the heap, and they develop these traditions about tattoos and certain lingo and so on. When those people left the prison, they were the most skilled in terms of being professional. They were professional criminals. They were the most skilled as things opened up with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Even earlier, Khrushchev was the premier. He had a little cessation period. These people came back onto the streets, and they were sophisticated criminals and able to take advantage of the criminal opportunity. So these notions, this notion of the Vori and the Gulag and so on, were unique to the Russian situation and produced a certain mindset. There's a mindset about the criminals in general have that I call a sucker mentality. Criminals, particularly, they have to believe that they can victimize people, that they know they're small, they're tough, they're stronger, and that's how they can victimize their victims. what happened in this gulag system, and then ultimately under the communist system with the black market and so on, is that people became very skilled at running scams. How to get over, because there were shortages. So for example, I stayed in a hotel in Moscow. This is during the Soviet period, and we ate at a place called the Buffet in Tub. There were often shortages of food in buffets. But one day, I see these sausages arrive. There's a delivery of sausage to the buffet. Who comes immediately to the buffet? The employees of the hotel. They come and they all get their halves, their pieces, and so on. But when they leave, there's almost no sausage left for the people staying in the hotel. So I asked about this. I asked my colleagues and others about this. And they said this is true in every system, that the employees who work there, they take advantage of their job opportunities to get whatever they can get because there's shortages. There's a shortage of sausages, or there's a shortage of hats, or whatever they are. So they take advantage of that in order to get what they need to get for their family. Again, that's the same mindset that says, what I'm doing is not wrong. I have to feed my family. I got to take care of my family. I can't do it legally, so I have to do it in this underhanded black market way. And so they develop that kind of psychology, which, by the way, when they come to the United States, they bring the same sucker mentality with them. And that's why we see mostly the crimes committed by Russians, again, broad notion of who Russians are, they are scams. They scam the healthcare industry. They scam the auto accident industry. They have fake accidents. They do all sorts of things that are scams. The stock market, they have pump and dump schemes with stocks. They're not violent street crimes. They're crimes, smart crimes. They're crimes dealing with paperwork, dealing with black market, dealing with scams and schemes that they've developed this skill at over many years of having to survive in the Soviet Union.
Thank you. Dr. Jim, since you specialize in transnational crime, may I please ask you to list maybe several bullet points of peculiarities of the way Russian mafia commits crimes worldwide? Like several bullet points.
Well, again, I would stress what I just said, that their particular skill, more so than any other criminal organization I know of, Transnational or otherwise, do these, you could almost call them white-collar kind of crimes. The crimes that are committed in bureaucracy. They know how to manipulate bureaucracies to their ends. They're not engaged particularly in gambling or prostitution or extortion or the kinds of crimes that other organized groups typically are involved in. They specialize in these particular kinds of crimes. I think that makes them unique. Also makes them a unique threat as well.
May I please ask you about Russian inmates in U.S. prisons? Maybe they still have their codes that they practice in there.
No, first of all, I think there are very few who are in U.S. prisons. Most of the prosecutions that have occurred of Soviet immigrants, we call them, more Russian-speaking criminals is what the FBI calls them, are done by the federal government, not by state or local governments. When they go to prison at all, they go to federal prison. And sometimes they just deported. They're sent back to wherever they came from as opposed to keeping them in a U.S. prison. We have numerous examples of people who were active in Bright Beach, for example, who served terms in federal prisons in the U.S. and then were shipped back to the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union.
What definition would you give to such a notion such as Russian criminal tradition from a scientific point of view?
I don't know that I would use the word tradition. Tradition assumes a certain centrality or a certain common notion, and I think that apart from this Vladimir notion that I mentioned that grew out of the Gulag, I think these are just lowlifes, if you will, who take advantage of criminal situations. They don't have any traditions. They're not, for example, so-called men of honor the Sicilian Mafia defines their members. They don't have these traditions of membership and having to pass through certain rituals to become members. In fact, the whole board system has somewhat broken down because the Gulag system itself is not like it was in the Soviet period. And now you have people buying the title of boring when they didn't actually earn it in the old way that the criminals, the real criminals, earned those, that label and had that sort of status and recognition.
In your opinion, what is the relation of Russian criminal tradition and such structures as NKVD?
Oh, I think that there's probably a fairly close relationship because, again, you have this range of criminals. Many of them are both in legal and illegal activities. There's a guy by the name of Semyon Oleg, for example, who's supposedly currently in Moscow. He's on the FBI's most wanted list. He's considered to be the most powerful of the Soviet gangsters who still extant and operate. He owns a number of legitimate businesses, not just in Moscow, but other places in the world. And so he operates both on the legal side and the illegal side. You can't do that without people involved in law enforcement at some level, the security agencies, knowing about you and knowing what you're doing. This is a guy who was brought up on charges in Moscow, and suddenly, mysteriously, these charges disappeared, and he was released. Well, why is that? Is it because people believed him to be innocent? I don't think so. I think it's because he had political connections. Who does he have political connections with? Not low-level people. He has to have political connections with higher-level people in position to make those decisions, whether they be judges, people in the Parliament, the Duma, or people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or wherever they are. These are the people who we have influence.
Thank you. Dr. Jim, do you have something to add to the topic of our interview? I mean, something that you would like to add, but I did not ask about it?
No, I would just, sort of reinforce this notion about being careful about using the label Russian Mafia too broadly and making it more simple than it actually is. It's a much more complicated notion. The nature of the crime itself is quite varied, and the nature of the individuals who are participating in this is quite varied. And this peculiar tradition that these people came from, I've seen certain scholars refer to having living in the Soviet Union is conniving to survive. That's what they had to do. So it develops a certain mental way of thinking about the world, in which you think that the world is made of suckers to be taken advantage of. And it's a mentality that underlies this criminal activity. And I think that's peculiar and unique to these particular
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim. It was a great pleasure.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.